The blood on Zelda Brennan's hands had long since dried, but the guilt remained wet and fresh as the day she accidentally shot her husband during a bank robbery gone wrong in Denver 3 years past. She stood at the edge of Granite, Colorado in the autumn of 1878, her traveling bag worn thin as her hope, watching the miners and merchants go about their daily business with the kind of ease she had forgotten existed. The mountain town sat nestled in a valley where the aspens had turned gold, and the air smelled of pine and coming snow. She had arrived on the morning stage with nothing but $20 sewn into her skirt hem and a past that chased her like a shadow she could not outrun. At 24 years old, she felt ancient, hollowed out by remorse and the weight of choices that could never be unmade. The robbery had been Daniel's idea, her late husband's desperate attempt to pay off gambling debts that threatened to swallow them whole. Zelda had loved him with the blind devotion of a girl who married at 19. And when he pressed that cold revolver into her shaking hands and told her all she had to do was stand there and look dangerous, she believed him when he said nobody would get hurt. But Daniel had not anticipated the bank manager reaching for his own weapon. The explosion of gunfire in that cramped Denver bank had been deafening, and in the chaos and terror, Zelda's finger had squeezed the trigger. The bullet meant for the bank manager had struck Daniel in the chest instead. She watched the light leave his eyes before the law arrived, before she spent 2 years in a women's prison explaining that she had not meant to kill the only person she had ever loved. They released her early for good behavior, and because the judge took pity on a young widow who wept through her entire testimony. But freedom felt like another kind of prison. Denver held too many ghosts, too many accusing eyes from people who whispered about the girl who killed her own husband during a robbery. So Zelda drifted west into the mountains, searching for a place where nobody knew her name or her shame. Granite was smaller than she expected, a collection of wood frame buildings huddled against the base of mountains that seemed to scrape the sky. The main street was wide and muddy from recent rain, lined with a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a blacksmith shop, and a small church with a white steeple that looked too clean for this rough mining town. She made her way to the boarding house, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a crooked sign that read Hutchins Boarding for Respectable Folk. Mrs. Hutchins was a severe woman with steel gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She looked Zelda up and down with narrow eyes that cataloged every worn thread and patched seam. "I need a room," Zelda said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Just until I can find work." "We do not take in women of questionable character," Mrs. Hutchins replied, her thin lips barely moving. "This is a respectable establishment." "I am respectable," Zelda said, hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. "I can pay for 2 weeks up front." Money talked louder than morals in mining towns, and Mrs. Hutchins took the bills Zelda counted out from her carefully hoarded funds. The room was small and spare, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the mountains. Zelda set down her bag and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the exhaustion of travel and heartache settle into her bones. She had no plan beyond survival. The prison chaplain had written her a letter of introduction to the minister in Granite, suggesting she might find work as a seamstress or perhaps helping in the church. But Zelda had learned not to count on the kindness of strangers. People who knew about her past tended to keep their distance, as though failure and tragedy might be contagious. The next morning, she put on her least worn dress, a dark blue calico that had faded to the color of twilight, and made her way to the general store. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles that magnified his eyes to an alarming size, told her he had no need for help. The saloon keeper laughed when she inquired about washing dishes or cooking, saying his customers preferred their women prettier and their help less haunted-looking. By midday, Zelda's feet ached from walking the length of the small town, and her heart ached from the familiar sting of rejection. She was standing outside the blacksmith shop, gathering courage to inquire there as well, when a voice spoke behind her. "You look like someone who has had a hard morning." Zelda turned to find a tall man watching her with eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, denim trousers and a worn cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned dark from sun and work. A wide-brimmed hat shaded a face that was more interesting than handsome, with strong features and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with the kind of lean, muscular build that came from years of physical labor. There was something steady about him, something that made Zelda think of deep water and solid ground. "I am looking for work," she said, lifting her chin with what little pride she had left. "Though it seems Granite has no use for my particular skills." "What skills would those be?" His voice held genuine curiosity rather than mockery. "I can sew, cook, clean, keep accounts, tend animals, and apparently shoot straight enough to kill a man." The words came out bitter and sharp, surprising her. She had not meant to say that last part, had not meant to hand this stranger ammunition to use against her. But the cowboy did not recoil or look at her with the disgust she expected. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "That sounds like a terrible story," he said quietly. "And none of my business unless you want it to be." Tears burned behind Zelda's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in the street in front of a stranger, no matter how kind his voice. "I do not want charity," she said. "I just want honest work." "My name is Samuel Stone," the cowboy said, extending his hand. "I run a ranch about 5 miles outside town. My housekeeper quit last month to marry a silver miner, and I have been making a mess of things ever since. The job pays $15 a month plus room and board. The work is hard and the hours are long, but I treat my employees fair, and I do not ask questions about where people come from." Zelda stared at his outstretched hand as though it might disappear if she reached for it. "Why would you offer work to a complete stranger who just told you she killed someone?" "Because you told me the truth when a lie would have served you better," Samuel said simply. "That tells me more about your character than any reference letter could." Slowly, carefully, Zelda placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and calloused and steady, the handshake of a man who kept his word. "Zelda Brennan," she said. "And I should tell you that everything I touch seems to fall apart. I have a talent for failure that borders on remarkable." Samuel smiled then, a slow-spreading warmth that transformed his entire face. "Well, Miss Brennan, I have spent the last month burning every meal I cook and wearing shirts with missing buttons. I reckon we are well matched in the failure department. When can you start?" "Now," Zelda said, because she had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. "I can start right now." Samuel's ranch was a surprise. Zelda had expected something rough and barely functional, a bachelor's makeshift homestead held together with hope and poor planning. Instead, the Stone Ranch was a well-maintained property with a sturdy 2-story house painted white with green shutters, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals holding horses that looked healthy and well cared for. The land stretched out in all directions, grassland and scrub giving way to pine forests that climbed the mountain slopes. "This is beautiful," Zelda said, as Samuel helped her down from the wagon he had driven to collect her, and her meager belongings from the boarding house. "Mrs. Hutchins had been happy to see her go, especially when Zelda asked for a refund on the remaining days she had paid for. "My father built it," Samuel said, and something in his voice suggested that was not an entirely happy memory. "He died 2 years back and left it to me. I have been trying to keep it running the way he would have wanted, but ranching is easier with help." He showed her through the house, which was clean but cluttered in the way of men living alone. The kitchen was spacious with a good iron stove and a pump that brought water directly inside, a luxury Zelda had not expected. Her room was on the ground floor, off the kitchen, small but private with a real bed and a chest of drawers and even a rag rug on the wooden floor. "It was the housekeeper's room," Samuel explained. "My room is upstairs along with 2 guest rooms we never use. You have your own space and your privacy. I am not the kind of man who would presume otherwise." Zelda felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. She had been half afraid that this job offer came with expectations she was not prepared to meet. But Samuel's eyes were clear and honest, his manner respectful without being distant. "I will work hard," she promised. "I will earn my keep." "I have no doubt," Samuel said. "Now, I am going to go check on the horses and give you time to settle in. There is bread and cheese in the pantry if you are hungry, and the stove is still warm if you want to make coffee. Make yourself at home, Miss Brennan." After he left, Zelda stood in the middle of her small room and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling as hope. The first few days at the ranch passed in a blur of activity. Zelda threw herself into the work with a determination that bordered on desperation. She scrubbed the house from top to bottom, washing windows and beating rugs and polishing furniture until everything gleamed. She mended Samuel's shirts and sewed new curtains for the kitchen from fabric she found in a trunk in the attic. She learned the temperamental nature of the stove and began producing meals that were simple but hearty, the kind of food a working man needed. Samuel was easy to work for. He rose before dawn to tend the horses and cattle, spent his days riding the boundaries of his property or fixing fences, or doing the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. He came in for meals hungry and appreciative, always thanking her for her work, always treating her with a courtesy that felt genuine rather than performative. He did not pry into her past or ask uncomfortable questions. He simply accepted her presence as though she had always been there. But Zelda could not forget what she was. At night, alone in her room, she lay awake remembering the weight of the gun in her hand, the look of surprise on Daniel's face as he fell, the knowledge that she had destroyed the one good thing in her life through carelessness and fear. She had loved Daniel, and she had killed him. What kind of person did that make her? On her 4th evening at the ranch, she was washing dishes when Samuel came into the kitchen carrying a foal in his arms. The young horse was trembling and weak, its legs unable to support its weight. "The mare died giving birth," Samuel said, his voice tight with concern. "This little one is not strong enough to stand on her own. I need to feed her every few hours or we will lose her too." Zelda dried her hands and came to look at the foal, a delicate creature with a coat the color of dark honey. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me keep her warm and get milk into her. I mixed up some mare's milk replacer, but she is not taking to the bottle well." They set up a makeshift stall in the kitchen near the stove where the warmth would help the foal maintain her body heat. Samuel showed Zelda how to hold the bottle and coax the foal to drink, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he demonstrated the technique. They took turns through the night, one sleeping while the other sat with the foal, encouraging her to take just a little more milk, just one more swallow. Dawn found them both exhausted but triumphant. The foal was standing on her own, wobbly but determined, her dark eyes bright with the will to live. "She is going to make it," Samuel said, and the relief in his voice was profound. He looked at Zelda across the makeshift stall, and something passed between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for a fragile life. "What will you name her?" Zelda asked. "I think you should name her," Samuel said. "You are the one who got her through the worst of it." Zelda thought for a moment, watching the foal take tentative steps on legs that were growing stronger with each passing moment. "Hope," she said quietly. "Her name is Hope." Samuel smiled, that slow, warm smile that made something in Zelda's chest tighten. "Hope, that is a good name." As the weeks passed, Zelda found herself settling into a rhythm at the ranch that felt almost like belonging. She took pride in her work, in the orderly house and the good meals and the small improvements she made to their daily life. She planted an herb garden near the kitchen door, coaxing basil and thyme and rosemary from the mountain soil. She organized the pantry and the root cellar, making careful inventories and planning meals that would stretch their supplies through the coming winter. Samuel was a constant presence, steady and reliable in ways that surprised her. He fixed the loose board on her bedroom floor without her asking. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, presenting them awkwardly as though uncertain whether the gesture would be welcome. He taught her to ride one of his gentler horses, patient with her initial fear, encouraging when she finally found the courage to trust the animal beneath her. They fell into the habit of sitting together after dinner, talking about nothing and everything while the light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. Samuel told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's stern expectations and his mother's quiet kindness before she died when he was 12. He spoke of his dreams to expand the herd, to breed horses known throughout Colorado for their strength and temperament. Zelda found herself talking too, carefully at first and then with increasing honesty. She told him about growing up in a St. Louis orphanage, about the loneliness of being a child nobody wanted. She spoke of meeting Daniel, of being swept away by his charm and his promises of a better life. She did not yet tell him about the robbery or the shooting, but she sensed he knew there was more to her story than she was ready to share. One evening in late November, as the first real snow of the season began to fall, Samuel came in from the barn looking troubled. Zelda was kneading bread dough, her hands deep in the smooth, elastic mixture, and she looked up with concern. "What is wrong?" Samuel hung his coat and hat on the peg by the door and ran a hand through his dark hair. "I ran into Tom Hutchins in town today. He is Mrs. Hutchins' nephew, and apparently he has been asking questions about you." Zelda's hands stilled in the dough, her heart suddenly pounding. "What kind of questions?" "About where you came from, why you left Denver. He implied that you might be running from something." Samuel's blue eyes were serious but not accusing. "Zelda, I told you I would not pry into your past, and I meant that. But if there is trouble following you, I need to know so I can help." Zelda pulled her hands from the dough and washed them slowly, buying time to gather her courage. She had known this moment would come eventually. The past never stayed buried forever. "I was in prison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "in Denver, for 2 years." She felt rather than saw Samuel go very still. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the soft whisper of snow against the windows. "What did you do?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I killed my husband." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "During a bank robbery." "It was an accident, but he is just as dead as if I had meant it." She forced herself to turn and face him, to see the judgment and disgust she knew would be in his eyes. But Samuel was watching her with something that looked almost like pain. "Tell me," he said simply. So she did. She told him everything, the gambling debts and Daniel's desperation, her own foolish agreement to help with the robbery, the chaos of gunfire and her panicked shot that went so terribly wrong. She told him about the trial and the prison and the weight of guilt that had become her constant companion. She told him about the stares and whispers in Denver, about running to Granite in hopes of starting over, of becoming someone other than the girl who killed her husband. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face, though she had not realized she was crying. She wiped them away angrily with the back of her hand. "So now you know," she said. "I understand if you want me to leave. I will be gone by morning." Samuel crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and took her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs wiping away the tears that continued to fall. "You are not going anywhere," he said fiercely. "Do you hear me? You are not going anywhere." Zelda stared up at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "But I killed someone. I am a murderer." "You are a woman who made a terrible mistake in a moment of fear," Samuel said. "That does not make you a murderer. It makes you human." "You do not understand," Zelda said, pulling away from his touch because it hurt too much to accept the comfort she did not deserve. "Everything I touch falls apart. Everyone I love ends up hurt or dead. I will fail you just like I failed Daniel. I cannot let that happen, Zelda." Samuel's voice was low and intense, and when she tried to turn away, he gently but firmly turned her back to face him. "Listen to me. You will not fail me. You could not fail me if you tried." "You do not know that," she whispered. "Yes, I do." His hands were still cupping her face, his blue eyes boring into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Because you are here. Because you came to Granite broken and afraid, and instead of giving up, you asked for work. Because you spent a whole night saving a dying foal even though you were exhausted. Because you have been working yourself to the bone trying to earn your place here when you already belong. Failure is impossible when you are here, Zelda. Do you understand? You are not capable of failing because you never stop trying." "I killed him," Zelda said again, because it was the one truth she could not escape. "I know," Samuel said gently, "and you will carry that for the rest of your life. But that one terrible moment does not define who you are. It does not make you unworthy of happiness or a new start. It does not make you unworthy of being cared for." Something in his voice made Zelda's breath catch. "Samuel, I am saying this badly," he said, and she could see the vulnerability in his face now, the fear that he was revealing too much. "But I need you to know that I care about you, Zelda Brennan. I have cared about you since that first day in town when you stood there with your chin up and your eyes full of pain, asking for a chance. I care about you when you sing while you cook and do not realize you are doing it. I care about you when you check on Hope every morning before you even have your coffee. I care about you enough that if Tom Hutchins or anyone else tries to cause you trouble, they will have to go through me first." Zelda felt something crack open in her chest, a dam breaking under the pressure of too much held-back emotion. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am so afraid of hurting you." "Then we will be afraid together," Samuel said. "But do not leave, please. Do not run away from this because you think you are protecting me. Let me decide what risks I want to take." "I said I would fail you like I failed before," Zelda said. The words a final desperate attempt to make him see reason, to make him understand the danger of caring for someone as broken as her. Samuel smiled then, that wonderful warm smile that transformed his whole face. "And I am telling you that failure is impossible. You are here. That is enough. You will always be enough." And then he was kissing her, and Zelda was kissing him back, tasting salt from her tears and something sweet like hope. His arms came around her, strong and secure, and for the first time in 3 years, Zelda felt safe. They stood in the kitchen while the snow fell outside and the bread dough rose forgotten on the counter, holding each other like people who had been lost and finally found their way home. The winter that followed was the happiest time of Zelda's life. She and Samuel grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building a partnership that was equal parts practical and profound. They worked together during the day, caring for the animals and maintaining the ranch through the Colorado winter. They spent their evenings by the fire, reading aloud or playing checkers or simply talking about their hopes and dreams. Samuel courted her properly, bringing her small gifts from town, taking her on sleigh rides through the snow-covered landscape, treating her with a respect and tenderness that made her feel valued in ways she had never experienced. He was patient with her fears and her occasional nightmares, holding her when she woke shaking from dreams of gunfire and blood, reminding her that the past was behind her and the future was theirs to build. In January, Tom Hutchins did indeed cause trouble. He spread rumors through Granite about the ex-convict living at the Stone Ranch, suggesting impropriety and worse. Mrs. Hutchins refused to serve Zelda when she came to town for supplies, and several townspeople who had been friendly began crossing the street to avoid speaking to her. Samuel handled it with a quiet determination that made Zelda love him even more. He stood in the middle of the general store and told anyone who would listen that Zelda Brennan was the finest woman he knew, that she had paid her debt to society and deserved a chance at a new life, and that anyone who had a problem with her would answer to him. He stood in the church on Sunday and said the same thing, staring down the disapproving looks until people began to nod and murmur agreement. The scandal died down gradually, replaced by newer gossip about a claim jumper on the north side of town and a saloon girl who ran off with a prospector. People had short memories for other folks' troubles when there were plenty of their own to occupy them. By February, when the worst of the winter began to ease and the first hints of spring appeared in the lengthening days, Samuel asked Zelda to marry him. They were in the barn, tending to Hope, who had grown into a strong and spirited yearling. Samuel took Zelda's hand and led her outside into the clear, cold afternoon, where the sun sparkled on the snow, and the mountains rose sharp and beautiful against an impossibly blue sky. "I know we have not been together long," Samuel said, his breath misting in the cold air. "And I know you might need more time, but I love you, Zelda Brennan. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you work. I love how you never give up, even when things are hard. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Zelda looked at this good man who had given her a chance when nobody else would, who had seen past her mistakes to the person she was trying to become. She thought about failure and second chances, about the courage it took to trust in happiness after loss. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like flying. "Yes, Samuel Stone, I will marry you." They were married in March in the small church in Granite, with the minister who had written the letter of introduction presiding. Zelda wore a new dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored wool, and Samuel wore his best suit with a string tie. There were fewer guests than Zelda had hoped, but the ones who came mattered. The blacksmith and his wife attended, along with several of Samuel's fellow ranchers and their families. Even Mrs. Hutchins came, though she sat in the back and left immediately after the ceremony. None of it mattered because Samuel looked at Zelda like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And when he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her until death parted them, Zelda believed in the possibility of forever. The first years of their marriage were full of hard work and small joys. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Samuel's horse breeding program began to gain recognition, and buyers came from as far away as Denver to purchase his animals. Zelda took over the ranch's bookkeeping, discovering she had a talent for numbers and organization that helped them maximize their profits. Hope produced her first foal in the spring of 1880, a strong colt with his mother's spirit and his sire's powerful build. They named him Courage, and he became the foundation stallion for the breeding program Samuel had always dreamed of building. In the summer of that same year, Zelda realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted this child desperately, wanted to give Samuel the family he deserved, but she was haunted by the fear that somehow she would fail again, that her past mistakes would poison this new life. Samuel found her crying in the garden one evening, her hands pressed against her still flat belly. "What if I am a terrible mother?" she asked through her tears. "What if I hurt the baby somehow? What if my past comes back and ruins everything?" Samuel knelt beside her in the dirt, heedless of his clean trousers, and took her hands in his. "You will be a wonderful mother because you care so much about being good at it. And your past is just that, Zelda, past. It does not define our future or our child's future. We get to write that story together." "I am so afraid," she whispered. "I know," he said, pulling her into his arms. "But we will be afraid together. And then we will watch that fear disappear when we hold our baby for the first time." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1881, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being thrust into the world. They named him Daniel, after Zelda's first husband, because Samuel understood that honoring the past was different from being trapped by it. Holding her son for the first time, Zelda felt something fundamental shift inside her. This small, perfect person deserved a mother who was fully present, who did not spend every moment waiting for disaster to strike. Daniel deserved better than her fear and guilt. "I forgive myself," she whispered, looking down at her son's tiny face. "I forgive myself." Samuel, sitting beside the bed with his arm around her shoulders, kissed her temple. "I am proud of you." Motherhood transformed Zelda in ways she had not anticipated. She discovered reserves of patience and strength she had not known she possessed. She learned to trust in her own judgment, to believe that she was capable of making good decisions and caring for this precious life. Daniel was a happy, healthy baby who grew into a curious, adventurous toddler, and Zelda marveled at the miracle of him every single day. The ranch continued to thrive. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing workload, good men who treated Zelda with respect and became part of their extended family. Samuel's reputation as a horse breeder spread throughout Colorado and into neighboring territories. Money was still tight some years, but they always had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. In 1883, their daughter was born, a beautiful girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. They named her Sarah, and she completed their family in ways Zelda had not realized were incomplete. Daniel was a devoted big brother, and watching her children play together filled Zelda with a contentment so profound, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and sick animals, crop failures and unexpected expenses. Samuel's father's brother showed up one year demanding a share of the ranch, claiming it had been promised to him. The legal battle was expensive and stressful, but they prevailed with the help of a good lawyer and documentation that proved Samuel's sole ownership. Through it all, Zelda and Samuel's love deepened and matured. They learned to fight fair and forgive quickly, to support each other's dreams and carry each other's burdens. Samuel never once threw her past in her face during an argument. Zelda never doubted his commitment to their family. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Samuel took Zelda on a trip to Denver. She had not been back to the city since her release from prison, and she felt her old anxieties rise as they traveled. But Samuel held her hand on the train and reminded her that she was not the same frightened girl who had left this place. She was Zelda Stone, successful ranch woman, devoted mother, beloved wife. The past could not touch her unless she let it. They stayed in a good hotel and ate dinner in a fine restaurant. Samuel bought her a cameo brooch she admired in a shop window, even though she protested that it was too expensive. They went to the theater and saw a play, sitting in the balcony holding hands like young sweethearts. On their last evening in Denver, Zelda asked Samuel to take her to the bank where Daniel had died. She had not been back since that terrible day, but she needed to face it, needed to prove to herself that the memory no longer had power over her. The bank was smaller than she remembered, just an ordinary building on an ordinary street. They stood outside while the evening traffic passed around them, people going about their business, unaware of the ghosts one woman was confronting. "I loved him," Zelda said quietly. "Daniel. I loved him even though he made terrible choices. I loved him even though he brought me to this place, and I will always be sorry for what happened." "I know," Samuel said. "But I love you more," Zelda continued, turning to face her husband. "I love you in a way I did not know was possible. I love you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I could not believe in myself. I love you for giving me a family and a home and a reason to forgive myself." Samuel's eyes were bright with emotion. "You gave yourself those things, Zelda. I just loved you while you found them." They stood there on the Denver street as the sun set and the gas lamps flickered to life, holding each other and letting go of the past together. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children's growth. Daniel grew tall and strong, with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. He loved the horses and spent every spare moment in the barn, learning the business that would someday be his. Sarah was bright and curious, always reading, always asking questions that challenged Zelda to think more deeply about everything. In 1892, when Daniel was 11 and Sarah was 9, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was unexpected but welcomed, and their third child, a boy they named Thomas, was born healthy and hollering in the spring of 1893. He was a surprise baby who kept them young and reminded them that life always had room for one more blessing. Samuel's horse breeding program had by then become one of the most respected in Colorado. The Stone Ranch horses were known for their intelligence, endurance, and temperament. Buyers placed orders years in advance, and Samuel was able to command premium prices for his stock. They expanded their land holdings, purchasing adjacent property and increasing their herd. But success had not changed them in the ways that mattered. They still worked hard, still valued honesty and integrity, still treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. They tithed to the church and helped neighbors in need, remembering what it was like to have nothing and be judged for their circumstances. Zelda had become a respected member of the Granite community. She served on the church ladies' auxiliary and helped organize the annual harvest social. She taught younger women how to keep house and manage accounts, passing on the skills she had learned through necessity and determination. Nobody talked about her past anymore. She was simply Mrs. Stone, the capable and kind wife of Samuel Stone, mother to 3 fine children, pillar of the community. Sometimes, usually late at night when the house was quiet and Samuel slept beside her, Zelda would think about the girl she had been. That frightened young woman standing in Granite with nothing but guilt and $20 would not recognize the person Zelda had become. The transformation still amazed her, the distance she had traveled from despair to contentment. On a warm June evening in 1898, the family gathered on the front porch after dinner. Daniel, now 17, was preparing to leave for college in the fall, planning to study veterinary medicine so he could bring modern scientific knowledge back to the ranch. Sarah, at 14, was already corresponding with the teacher at the school in Granite about possibly becoming a teacher herself. Thomas, at 5, was curled up in Samuel's lap, fighting sleep while the adults talked. "Tell us the story," Sarah said, as she often did when the family was together. "About how you and Papa met." Zelda exchanged a glance with Samuel, seeing the warmth and love in his eyes that had not dimmed in 20 years. "It was a long time ago," Zelda began, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a well-worn tale. "I came to Granite with nothing but a traveling bag and a heart full of fear. I thought I was broken beyond repair, that I did not deserve happiness or a second chance." "But Papa saw you," Sarah prompted, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it again anyway. "But your father saw me," Zelda agreed. "He offered me work when nobody else would. He gave me a chance to prove I was more than my mistakes." "And you said you would fail him," Daniel added, grinning. "I did," Zelda said. "I told him I would fail him like I failed before. I was so certain that everything I touched would turn to disaster. And Papa said failure was impossible," Sarah finished triumphantly. "He said failure was impossible because I was there," Zelda corrected gently. "He believed in me before I believed in myself. He taught me that one terrible moment does not define an entire life, that there is always room for redemption and growth and love." Samuel shifted Thomas in his arms and reached out to take Zelda's hand. "Best decision I ever made, offering you that job." "Best decision I ever made was accepting it," Zelda replied, squeezing his hand. They sat together as the stars emerged and the mountain air cooled, a family built on the foundation of second chances and stubborn hope. Zelda looked at her husband and her children, at the home they had created, and the life they had built, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had finally outrun the shadows of her past. The years that followed brought their share of joys and sorrows, as life always does. They mourned when Samuel's older brother died unexpectedly, leaving behind a wife and young children. Zelda immediately offered to take in the family, remembering what it felt like to be alone and desperate. Samuel's sister-in-law and her 2 children lived with them for a year while she got back on her feet, and the house rang with the noise and energy of 5 children. Daniel went off to college and came home transformed, full of knowledge and ideas about modern ranch management. He fell in love with a girl from Denver, a doctor's daughter who was not afraid of hard work and who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They married in 1902, and Daniel brought his bride home to the Stone Ranch, building a small house on the property where they started their own family. Sarah did become a teacher, known throughout the region for her patience and innovative methods. She never married, declaring that she was perfectly happy with her students and her books, though Zelda suspected there had been a heartbreak somewhere along the way that her daughter never spoke about. Thomas grew up to be the most adventurous of their children, leaving the ranch at 18 to see the world. He worked on ships and in mines, traveled to San Francisco and Seattle, sent letters from places Zelda had never heard of. But he always came home eventually, bringing stories and gifts and restless energy that kept them all entertained. Samuel's health began to decline in 1905. He was 53 years old and had worked hard all his life, and his body was simply wearing out. The doctor in Granite diagnosed a weak heart and told him to take it easy, but Samuel was not the kind of man who knew how to slow down. Zelda watched him carefully, rationing his work and making sure he got plenty of rest, terrified of losing him. "I am not going anywhere yet," Samuel would tell her when he caught her worried looks. "I have too much to do. Grandchildren to meet, horses to breed, years to spend with you. But they both knew that time was not unlimited, that the good years were slowly giving way to something more fragile. They made the most of every day, taking joy in small moments and refusing to let fear steal their happiness. On a golden afternoon, in September 1908, Samuel and Zelda took a ride up to the high meadow where the aspens were turning and the grass was still green. They had not ridden together in some time, and Samuel moved more slowly than he once had. But his eyes were bright with pleasure as they reached the spot where they had picnicked so many times over the years. They dismounted and spread a blanket, sitting close together while the horses grazed nearby. The view stretched for miles in every direction, mountains and sky and the small collection of buildings that marked the ranch below. "This is where I want my ashes spread," Samuel said quietly. "When the time comes, this spot right here where I can see the ranch and the mountains and all of Colorado spread out like a promise." Zelda felt tears sting her eyes. "Do not talk about that, Zelda." Samuel turned to face her, cupping her cheek with one weathered hand. "We have had 30 wonderful years together. 30 years I would not trade for anything in the world, but we both know I am not going to live forever." "I cannot lose you," Zelda whispered. "I do not know how to be in this world without you." "Yes, you do," Samuel said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived terrible things and built a beautiful life. You raised 3 incredible children. You turned a struggling ranch into a thriving business. You have everything you need to keep going with or without me. But I do not want to be without you." "I know, love. I know." Samuel pulled her close, and they sat holding each other while the wind whispered through the aspens, and the sun painted the world in shades of gold. Samuel died 3 years later in February 1911, passing peacefully in his sleep with Zelda holding his hand. He was 59 years old, and his loss left a hole in the world that felt impossible to fill. Zelda mourned him deeply, genuinely, the way a person grieves when they have lost their other half. But she did not break. She had Samuel's voice in her head, reminding her that she was strong, that she had everything she needed to continue. She had her children and grandchildren around her, offering comfort and support. She had the ranch that she and Samuel had built together, a living legacy of their love and hard work. In the spring, Zelda and Daniel rode up to the high meadow and spread Samuel's ashes where he had requested, watching them catch the wind and scatter across the land he had loved. Zelda spoke to him as though he could hear her, telling him about the new foals and the grandchildren's latest accomplishments, promising that she would keep the ranch running the way he would have wanted. Life continued, as it always does. Zelda found herself adapting to widowhood, discovering that she could be alone without being lonely. She stayed active in the community, continued to manage the ranch's books, spent time with her growing family. She became the family matriarch, the strong center that everyone orbited around, offering wisdom and support and unconditional love. In 1915, when America was on the brink of entering a world war that would change everything, Zelda celebrated her 61st birthday surrounded by 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and more friends than she could count. They gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted all afternoon, with food and music and stories that stretched back decades. Sarah made a toast, raising her glass and calling for everyone's attention. "To Mama, who taught us that our past does not define us, that there is always room for second chances, and that love and determination can overcome any obstacle." Everyone drank to that, and Zelda felt tears stream down her face, though they were happy tears this time. She looked around at all these people she loved, at the life she had built from the ashes of her worst moment, and she knew that Samuel had been right all those years ago. Failure had been impossible because she was there. She had shown up to her own life, even when it was hard, even when she was afraid. She had chosen to keep trying, to keep loving, to keep building. And in doing so, she had created something beautiful and lasting. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Zelda walked out to the barn to check on the horses one last time. Hope, now an ancient mare of 37 years old, nickered softly when she saw Zelda approach. Against all odds, the foal they had saved that long ago winter night was still alive, still strong, a testament to the power of determination and love. Zelda stroked the mare's soft nose and whispered, "We made it, girl. We both made it." The stars were bright overhead, the same stars that had shone on a frightened young woman arriving in Granite with nothing but guilt and a worn traveling bag. But Zelda was not that woman anymore. She was someone who had learned to forgive herself, who had discovered that love was stronger than fear, who had proven that one terrible moment did not have to define an entire life. She thought of Samuel, of his steady presence and unwavering belief in her. She thought of their 3 children and 7 grandchildren, of the ranch that would continue for generations. She thought of all the small moments that had built into a lifetime, all the choices that had led her here, and she whispered into the night air, "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for teaching me that failure is impossible when you show up with your whole heart. Thank you for loving me." The wind carried her words up toward the stars, and Zelda felt at peace. She lived 14 more years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 75 in the summer of 1929. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounded her in her final days, holding her hands and telling her how much she was loved, how much she had meant to all of them. In her last conscious moments, Zelda saw Samuel waiting for her, looking young and strong and smiling that wonderful warm smile that had first captured her heart. He held out his hand to her, and she reached for it without fear. "I told you failure was impossible," Samuel said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered. "You were right," Zelda replied, taking his hand and feeling the warmth of it spread through her entire being. "You were right about everything." They buried her next to Samuel in the small cemetery outside Granite, under a simple headstone that read, "Zelda Stone, beloved wife and mother, 1854–1929. Failure was never possible." The funeral was attended by what felt like half of Colorado, people whose lives she had touched with her kindness and strength, people who remembered the frightened young woman who had arrived with nothing and built everything. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through Daniel and his children and their children after them. The Stone Ranch horses remained famous throughout the West, bred from Hope's bloodline, carrying forward the legacy of a woman who learned that showing up was the opposite of failure, that second chances were real, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew down from the mountains and the aspens whispered their ancient songs, people swore they could see 2 figures riding together through the high meadow, a man and a woman who had found each other when both needed saving, who had built something beautiful from broken pieces, who had proven that the only real failure was giving up. Zelda Brennan Stone had been many things in her 75 years. An orphan, a wife, a convict, a housekeeper, a mother, a rancher, a pillar of the community, a woman who killed the man she loved and learned to forgive herself. But most importantly, she had been someone who showed up to her own life with her whole heart, even when it was terrifying, even when she was certain she would fail. And in showing up, she had discovered something Samuel had known all along. That failure is impossible when you are present, when you love fiercely, when you refuse to let your worst moment define you. That second chances are not given but earned through the daily work of becoming someone worthy of them. That redemption is not a destination but a journey, one step at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. The story of Zelda and Samuel became part of Granite's folklore, told and retold through the generations. Young people facing their own failures and mistakes would hear about the woman who killed her husband and still found happiness, about the cowboy who saw past her guilt to her worth, about how they built a life together that lasted beyond death. And the lesson was always the same: that it is never too late to start over, that love can transform even the most broken heart, that showing up with courage and honesty is the opposite of failure. That when someone tells you they will fail you like they failed before, sometimes the only response needed is simple truth spoken with conviction. Failure is impossible when you are here, when you show up, when you stay. The Stone Ranch still stands today, a monument to second chances and stubborn hope, to the power of love to heal and transform, to the truth that our worst moments do not have to define us. The land that Samuel and Zelda worked together stretches out under the Colorado sky, and if you listen carefully on autumn evenings when the aspens turn gold and the wind carries the scent of coming snow, you can almost hear them. A woman's voice saying she will fail, she is certain of it, she is broken beyond repair, and a man's voice responding with gentle certainty: no, failure is impossible, you are here, and that is enough. You will always be enough.